I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Musk on the defense. The Tesla CEO claims the SEC is violating his constitutional right to free speech by coming down on his tweets. Plus, Boeing facing a global crisis as more governments around the world ground its best-selling 737 MAX jets after a second deadly crash. And our exclusive and wide-ranging conversation with former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, weighing in on Brexit, big tech, and calls to break up Silicon Valley's biggest players. But first, to our top story, Tesla CEO Elon Musk is defending a pair of tweets he sent last month. In February, Musk tweeted that the electric car maker would make about 500,000 cars this year. Just a few hours later, he revised that tweet, saying, meant to say annualized production rate at end of 2019, probably around 500,000, i.e. 10,000 cars per week. Deliveries for a year still estimated to be about 400,000. The SEC has asked a judge to hold Musk in contempt for violating restrictions on his social media posts due to a prior settlement. Musk told a judge in New York, meantime, that he has a right to free speech, though he did say he's dramatically decreased his tweeting so as not to get into unnecessary disputes with the SEC. Joining us now from New York, Bloomberg's Craig Trudell, who covers the company for us. And Craig, Musk's team filed a 140-page response. What is their argument here?
Yeah, initially this looked pretty straightforward, where the settlement required for any material that, or any information that could be reasonably considered material, that Musk had to go to the company and ask for pre-approval to send it from his Twitter feed. Tesla and Musk don't deny the SEC's claim that he didn't get pre-approval for the tweet that you mentioned earlier. So this seemed pretty straightforward. The case that Musk and his lawyers are making, in part, are the First Amendment argument that you laid out, but also they take issue with the idea that tweet was material. They say that there wasn't a reaction in the stock, which I can attest to. I remember when it went out and there wasn't much movement in how the shares were trading. But certainly, one thing that undercuts Musk's argument here is the idea that he sent the second follow-up tweet. Tesla and Musk, make the argument that they were just doing that out of an abundance of caution and point to that as sort of evidence that they've been taking this settlement seriously. But the SEC is saying, no, you're not. You didn't get this pre-approved.
That said, Musk in his statement, he says, he's dramatically decreased his tweeting, not because he is concerned about noncompliance, but rather because he wants to err on the side of caution to avoid these unnecessary disputes with the SEC. Isn't that another sideways jab at the SEC?
It is, and it doesn't really square with how Musk has been acting. We have to remember that this is the same guy who has tweeted that the SEC is the short sellers enrichment commission. It's the same guy who went on 60 Minutes and said that he doesn't have respect for the SEC. And more recently, when the SEC sought to hold him in contempt of this settlement, he went on the attack again. So when he says that he's been, proceeding with caution or tried to be careful about getting into unnecessary disputes, he sure is getting into a lot of disputes, and so that just doesn't really sort of square. That is one argument that he made that didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense.
Meantime, the SEC has requested permission to respond to Musk's response, but what are the sort of penalties that Musk could be facing here? I mean, on the extreme end, couldn't he be barred from running Tesla or any public company?
Yes, and that was the punishment that the SEC initially sought back in September, and you saw this really rash reaction in the shares, and it only took until the next day. You saw the shares plunge on a Friday, and by Saturday, a settlement was reached. And so clearly, it's well established that this would cause a huge negative reaction for Tesla. You would think that the SEC, as seriously as they may be taking this case, would keep that in mind in terms of what it's seeking for a punishment here, and would maybe sort of guard against seeking that again, because one of the criticisms that Musk and folks who are following this case and taking his side are saying is that the SEC is supposed to be looking out for the investor, and by sort of over pursuing Musk and seeking to bar him from serving as an executive at the company would maybe be a punishment that wouldn't fit the crime in this case.
Right. So that is perhaps a less likely option in the interest of shareholders. Okay, Bloomberg's Craig Trudell, thank you for keeping us updated on that story. Meantime, Uber has been ordered to pay $20 million to settle California lawsuits over whether its drivers are employees or independent contractors. The cases turned on whether drivers were forced by their contracts to resolve conflicts by arbitration and forbidden to join in class action lawsuits. Last year, the Supreme Court bolstered the power of employers to force workers to use individual arbitration. For more, I want to bring in our legal reporter, Joel Rosenblatt. So talk to us about the origin of these employment claims.
Yeah, so there are many suits that Uber is settling, I would say, for a bargain. The $20 million is a bargain for Uber. They were brought, I think the central suit was brought in 2013, and this is the time where, right, Uber's just getting rolling here in San Francisco in particular, and there's this tension over whether or not they should be treated as employees or, as Uber has maintained all along, as independent contractors. That's the origin of the central suit.
So the lawsuits were promising. Why are they getting away with settling for a bargain?
Well, in one word, it's arbitration. So Uber has contended and fought and won with the help of an appeals court, and I should add, the Supreme Court with the help of Neil Gorsuch and appointed by Donald Trump, with rulings that have upheld its arbitration agreements. So Uber has made it difficult to opt out of arbitration. If you want to work for Uber, the general course for most people is that they sign the agreement, they start working, and they're bound by arbitration, meaning that they can't take their cases or their conflicts to court. They can't band together in class actions. They have to fight one-on-one behind closed doors of arbitration. And courts have kind of consistently upheld Uber's right to do that. And that's the weapon they've used to kind of blunt these lawsuits.
Now, that said, there was a ruling in California about a company called Dynamics, right? It's a trucking company, had to do with their drivers, where they did rule that those contractors should be treated as employees, correct?
That's right. And that's kind of, if you're a worker, if you're a driver for Uber hoping to get the benefits of employees one day, this is now your big hope. This is a California Supreme Court ruling last year that the court said applies broadly throughout the economy. We're still looking. It's still early on that ruling, and cases are kind of working their way up. But this is the one kind of, as Uber is taking the company public, this is the one concern that people haven't maybe paid enough attention to for the business model going forward.
So how could that ruling affect Uber?
Well, the same way that this case did, only it would be, it's much more difficult for Uber to get out from underneath the Dynamics ruling. So the ruling would say, look at under the relationship that you have with your drivers, under that relationship, these drivers are employees and they're entitled to the benefits under Dynamics. So that's a different ruling, and it's much more rigorous. It's much more difficult for Uber to get out from underneath with its arbitration agreements.
And what about the broader employees of the gig economy? Well, right? I mean, Uber isn't the only company. Of course, there's Lyft, there's Instacart, there's all of these companies that employ many, many, many contractors.
Absolutely, and this was the case that was like we're talking about Uber, but this was the case that we've been talking about that was settled that many looked to for the broader gig economy. Now that case is against Grubhub. And it's before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals here in San Francisco. This summer, we're going to have a key hearing under Dynamics. That's what they're looking at. They're looking at this Grubhub case and the rules under the Dynamics ruling that we've been discussing as the future of how the gig economy is going to sort out and whether or not these employees are independent contractors or one day maybe employees.
So the fight for drivers to get employee status and the benefits that come with it, that fight is ongoing. It's not over. Is that what you're saying?
It's not over. It's not over. It's not over. It's gonna continue, and I think it's gonna be a more fierce fight. For the time being, Uber's glad to have this one done, put it aside, go public, and
for
fight
a bargain, as you say.
For a bargain and fight the fight down the road.
All right, Bloomberg's Joel Rosenblatt, always appreciate you breaking down these very complex legal issues for us, and I know you'll keep us posted on some of these other rulings to come. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Facebook removed and then restored several ads placed by U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren's presidential campaign Monday. The ads promoted Warren's plan to break up tech giants like Facebook, Amazon, and Google. The social media company said the ads violated its corporate logo use policy. Warren swiped at Facebook over the removal, tweeting, "Curious, while I think Facebook has too much power, let's start with their ability to shut down a debate over whether Facebook has too much power. Thanks for restoring my posts. But I want a social media marketplace that isn't dominated by a single censor. Facebook restored those posts for the sake of, they said, robust debate. Meantime, U.S. Senator Ted Cruz also sided with Warren, retweeting her tweet, saying, "First time I've ever retweeted Elizabeth Warren, but she's right. Big tech has way too much power to silence free speech. They shouldn't be censoring Warren or anybody else. A serious threat to our democracy." It's a debate we're going to continue to have here on this show. Coming up, regulators around the globe are now halting flights of the Boeing 737 MAX after a second deadly crash. Now President Trump is weighing in, saying commercial aircrafts are too modern. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Around the globe, the issues of tech regulation and enforcement have become a major platform for politicians. I caught up with former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair and asked him if he thinks big tech needs more regulation.
Politicians exploit people's anxiety about the pace of change and the accelerating pace of change. They see these big companies, these wealthy people who run them, and they target the companies and they target the technology as something that's going to disrupt and change our lives in ways that we can't control, and it's basically a bad thing. And my view is that this technological revolution is a fact, but in any event, it's essentially a good thing, but we have to deal with its consequences.
Later in the hour, we're going to have much more of my exclusive conversation with former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, including his thoughts on Brexit. Well, investigators are still piecing together why an Ethiopian Airlines Boeing 737 MAX plunged to the ground minutes after takeoff on Sunday, as regulators around the globe are opting for caution. Officials in the UK, the EU, India, China, Australia, and Indonesia have all now grounded the planes, while the US FAA and Boeing say they're still confident in the jets. Meantime, President Trump tweeted, "Airplanes are becoming far too complex to fly. Pilots are no longer needed, but rather computer scientists from MIT. I see it all the time in many products, always seeking to go one unnecessary step further when often old and simpler is far better. Split-second decisions are needed and the complexity creates danger. All of this for great cost, yet very little gain. I don't know about you, but I don't want Albert Einstein to be my pilot. I want great flying professionals that are allowed to easily and quickly take control of a plane." Brooke Sutherland covers the industrial sector for Bloomberg Opinion and joins us now from New York. So, Brooke, is there any truth to the president's assertion here about the technological risks to modern flying?
You know, it seems like he's perhaps picking up on the issue that's being blamed for the first crash of the 737 MAX. That was the Lion Air crash back in October. And what's being blamed there is this system. It's called MCAS, and it's basically a flight control system that Boeing put in place to sort of counteract the risk of a loss of lift in the airplanes. They moved the engines up higher onto the airplane. That was to accommodate the fact that they are larger, although more fuel efficient. And then that system got faulty sensor data that triggered it up and caused the plane to dive down. And so in that respect, I mean, he does sort of have a point in that this system was throwing off the normal operations of the airplane and that there are manual overrides, but they were more difficult to execute than perhaps should have been necessary. There's been a lot of pushback from pilots saying they weren't properly trained on all of the features of this system, that they didn't feel like they had all the methods in place in order to do what they needed to do. Now, the counterpoint to that, I think, would be that innovation is a good thing, research is a good thing. This is a more fuel-efficient plane that's generally supposed to be safer, smarter. All of these technological advances that have allowed us to, generally speaking, be very comfortable flying, I think are a good thing.
So now you have multiple countries around the world grounding these planes, and yet still not the US FAA. The one analyst from Jefferies called it a rebellion against the FAA. I mean, how unprecedented is this?
I think it's extremely unprecedented. And I mean, you remember the 787 with Boeing when they had those battery fires, and the FAA did come out and ground the planes in that case. And so to see the FAA so isolated in sort of its resistance here and not taking a more conservative approach, I think is really unique. And you have to wonder at what point that starts to reflect on the global world's view of the Trump administration. I mean, it's sort of a rebuff of the FAA's word in a certain extent to say, you may think this is airworthy, but we're going to find out for ourselves, which I think is a really telling and really sort of stunning statement on part of the world. So what do you think needs to happen here in order to, make flyers and investors more comfortable with the technology on these planes? Or, is this a huge setback, even though we don't know the cause of this crash? I actually think that the groundings could be a positive thing for both Boeing and for general flyer confidence. I think if Boeing wanted to be proactive and perhaps get out in front of this, I mean, understanding that we still don't have very much information about what happened in the Ethiopian Airlines crash, but why not play it safe? Why not say, you know what, we're going to put these planes on the ground until we figure out what happened, because we want everybody to feel absolutely comfortable and confident in getting aboard these aircraft. So I think, with the 787 grounding, that was thought to be disastrous at the time that it happened, and there were all of these doom and gloom predictions. That didn't actually come to fruition. The plane turned out to be a huge generator of profit and cash for Boeing. It now has a stellar safety record, and so I don't think a grounding is necessarily a death sentence. Now, what would be is if you did have any type of tragic accident occur in the U.S. among the airlines that are still flying these planes.
Right, and I'm actually looking at the map on FlightAware right now of the airlines that are still flying these planes in the United States. American, Southwest, dozens of them are in the air right now. The black boxes have been found, and we're just waiting for investigators to determine the cause. But in the meantime, we will see how other countries and governments respond. Bloomberg's Brooke Sutherland, thank you so much for that update. Coming up, by 2025, India is set to be the world's third largest economy, and venture capital firms are anxious to get in on the growth. What trends are they seeing in India next? And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio, listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. India is coming online at an exponential rate, growing from 200 to 500 million users in just 3 years. And investors are jumping at the opportunity to be part of that growth. Since 2015, Lightspeed India Partners has raised 2 new funds totaling $310 million. And with 6 partners across its Delhi and Bangalore offices, it has become one of the largest VC teams in India. Now it is starting to see some of its investment spread globally. Joining us to discuss, Bejol Somaya, a partner at Lightspeed India Partners, with a relation to Lightspeed Venture Partners,
That's right,
which we often cover here in the United States, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we started investing in India as Lightspeed actually about 12 years ago. And then as the opportunity opened up, we decided that we would start dedicated funds for the region. As we saw mobile growth really exploding and leading to the internet growth that you just spoke about.
So the growth in India has been astounding. I mean, 20 million people online in the year 2000. That might be 700 million in 2020. So how do you even begin to assess the opportunities? I mean, are they just exploding, or is it pretty obvious where you should be putting your money?
No, it feels like it. And I think what's changing is at the same time that you have internet growth exploding, you have now a cycle of repeat entrepreneurs in the market that are forming from some of the more scaled companies, and you have more and more risk capital available. So you have the intersection of multiple different things happening. Macro tailwinds are strong. That's leading to a lot of opportunity. And I think that what we're beginning to see and what we're excited by is that technology is making its way into every industry. So it could be commerce and retail, hospitality. One of our companies, Oyo Rooms, is doing a great job there. Logistics, ride sharing, transportation, media. So a lot of the things that we've seen in other parts of the world, in other large digital economies, is beginning to happen in India.
Big U.S. e-commerce and commerce companies like Amazon and Walmart have taken an interest in India. Amazon has invested billions of dollars. Walmart bought Flipkart, of course, in a big coup.
Yes.
And those businesses combine logistics and e-commerce. How has their arrival impacted your job?
Yeah, I think it's a net positive thing, because for us as early stage investors, we want to build companies that ultimately will get public or will have some form of exit. So the idea that there is downstream capital or strategic investors or buyers for these companies is a good thing. One of the things I often say about India is it's an open market, so it's the world's next big digital economy. It's open, and what that means is now capital and interest is coming in from all over the world. So it could be the US and US strategics. There are Chinese strategics and investors that are getting very active, folks like Naspers. So there's capital flowing in from all parts of the world. I think that's good, provided it's ultimately used in the right way, because too much capital can also be problematic.
On the other hand, doesn't their arrival also threaten startups? I mean, you know, Senator Elizabeth Warren calls that area around big tech companies the kill zone, where either you get bought by a big tech company or you get killed because they do it themselves.
It can. The way I think about that is if entrepreneurs in India are replicating playbooks from other markets, then you run the risk of the original playbook writers showing up, like Amazon, and running their playbook, and it's going to be tough. I think actually over time, the largest companies, the most defensible companies, the most valuable companies will be those that are built with a very India-first mentality, appreciating the nuance of that market, writing the playbook for that market. And I think when you do that, and we've seen that with some of our companies like Oyo or Byju's or Indian Energy Exchange, when you build companies for that market, usually there aren't other folks that are doing what Amazon and Uber can do.
How does investing in India differ from investing in the United States? Like, how is your job different from Jeremy Liu's?
Yeah, look, I think fundamentally we do the same thing. We've got to identify great founders early, going after big markets. So I think the fundamentals remain the same. What great entrepreneurs need to do remains the same. But the business models will vary in those markets. I'll give you an example, Emily. For example, you know, if you take Airbnb in hospitality, thin layer, largely technology, very scalable, doesn't get involved too much in ops. You take a company like Oyo Rooms. You need to, in a market like India where supply quality is so variable of hotels, you need to go in and fix that supply. You need to be prepared to do some heavy lifting.
And last quick question, how do you deal with the government bureaucracy, which is infamous in India for slowing things down?
Yeah, well, that's tough. I mean, in a lot of these new sectors, and I think this is true globally, regulation is always behind business models. So that is, I think, a part of our job in every market, to be honest. The new government, or the government that was elected a few years ago, is more progressive with respect to business, and so we feel pretty positive on that front.
Okay, Lightspeed India Partners partner, Bejul Somaya, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
All right, coming up, Theresa May's Brexit plan just failed again in Parliament. We're going to hear what former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair has to say about the process, what timing. I sat down with him earlier today, and get his thoughts on tech regulation. We're also going to talk about the private space race heating up in one company that is taking on Elon Musk. This is Bloomberg. Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. UK Prime Minister Theresa May's Brexit deal was once again rejected by Parliament Tuesday, throwing the country deeper into political crisis. Members of Parliament are expected to vote Wednesday to take a no-deal option off the table, but former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair isn't optimistic. I spoke with him earlier today about the Brexit process.
Parliament will reject that, since there's always been a huge majority in Parliament against no deal. So I've always said it's very, very unlikely this will happen. And then, frankly, we will be into an application for an extension of the process.
I also spoke to Blair about the role of tech in government as he wraps up a tour here in Silicon Valley, and started by asking about an op-ed he wrote in TechCrunch this week, where he said, quote, "Populists of both left and right have risen in prominence, and in their search for scapegoats to sustain their success, tech is now firmly in their firing line." Take a listen to why this concerns him.
Politicians exploit people's anxiety about the pace of change and the accelerating pace of change. They see these big companies, these wealthy people who run them, and they target the companies and they target the technology as something that's going to disrupt and change our lives in ways that we can't control, and it's basically a bad thing. And my view is that this technological revolution is a fact, but in any event, it's essentially a good thing, but we have to deal with its consequences. But if it's handled in the right way, it can change our lives in good ways, and it can offer enormous opportunities, and it's up to politics to address how we access those opportunities and mitigate the risks, because it will also, for example, displace jobs.
You also say that the first politicians who master the tech revolution will decide what the future looks like. How so?
Because I think if I'm right in saying this technological revolution is the 21st century equivalent of the 19th century industrial revolution, if I'm right in saying that, then look back on what the 19th century industrial revolution did. It changed the way people lived and worked. It changed the relationship between the countryside and the city. In the end, it changed the laws. It changed politics. It changed everything. And this will be the same. So the first politicians that come along and understand it, master it, make sense of it, and show how this can form a narrative of the future that is essentially optimistic, those are the ones that will succeed politically.
So Democratic presidential candidate, U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren, has just proposed breaking up the biggest tech companies, Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon. I assume you don't agree with her proposal, but what do you think?
I don't agree with her proposals, but I think it's a really interesting speech. And, to be fair to her, I think, it's a speech with an intellectual coherence to it. And I think what it shows is, I think, where the Democrat platform may well go. And exactly the same issues are going on in the UK and Europe, that there's big tech. Personally, I think a better way of dealing with it is to regulate them through actually having a regulator for these large tech companies. Because I think if you try and break them up, I'm not sure that really works. I think if you try and slice them up, you'll find enormous difficulty in doing that. And it's important always to understand that one of the reasons these companies are so large is because they're offering a service people want. So yes, there are huge questions that arise out of their dominance and their power, but I think it's a better way to regulate this in a way that has the public interest put into the mix when we look at these companies in a sort of structured way than think that you're actually, if you cut them in three, you're going to create a competition.
So what does that regulation look like to you? And should the U.S. take the lead of the EU, which has been pretty tough on big tech?
Yeah, but I think it's less about sort of being tough or not tough. It's working out what the right way to do it. And one of the other things we suggested, by the way, is that it would be sensible, particularly given the huge competitive power of China in AI, particularly in time to come, it would be sensible if Europe and America worked together on this.
How so?
Because if you created a more level playing field between Europe and America, you would actually you would give people the opportunity then to develop technologies of the future. It would allow these companies, not these big companies, and they're big enough already, but other companies to grow. And I think it would be very sensible to have a kind of transatlantic alliance on regulation of tech for the future. But the purpose of it should not be to hit them or be tough on them. The purpose of it should be to represent the public interest, because obviously there are public interest issues that come with this. And the sensible thing, rather than trying to decide each of these issues by either, as I say, breaking them up, because I'm not even sure that would destroy their monopoly power. If you broke them up, you might just find you have created 3 monopolies, not one.
Do you believe they're a monopoly?
Well, they are powerful. Let's say they're, if you take Facebook, Google, Amazon, they're incredibly powerful. They're likely to become even more powerful in time to come. But I think a better way of doing it is to look at it in terms of, say, how do we have the public interest into this? So I think these companies, where I think Elizabeth Warren is right, is that they are like utilities, right? They're utility platforms. And so, in the same way when, electricity and the water industry and other things were created in the 19th century, and they were created first in the private sector, in time people said, well, look, these are utilities everyone depends on, so they're going to have to be publicly regulated. In some cases, people even went to publicly owned. But the point is, if they've got that amount of power, there will be a demand from the public that the public interest is taken into account. But I think a better way of doing that is to have regulators that work with those companies rather than break them up.
So Facebook, for example, multiple scandals, compromised the data of millions and millions of people, many apologies. Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO, has now said, we're going to focus on privacy, we're going to focus on private communication. Is that enough?
Well, I understand why he wants to do that, and privacy is obviously an issue, but I think the central question for all of these tech companies is power. It's their power. I mean, they are powerful. If you look at their dominant position in advertising, or if you look at the role Facebook inevitably will play in politics today. Now, what I think is, in a way absurd is to sort of say to them, you've got to be responsible for everything that's happening. Right? The truth is, it's a joint responsibility. You know, we have a public interest in making sure that they exercise their position responsibly, but we're going to also have to work with them to share that responsibility from the public policy point of view. Because many of these questions, you know, whether it's hate speech or incitement or, so for example, radicalization or child pornography, whatever it is, these are things that obviously there's a public interest in sorting out, but that public interest is going to require not just those companies to behave responsibly, but government to be alongside the process of that and making sure that it's done in the most effective way.
So how can we trust the companies to understand and live up to their responsibilities? And similarly, how can we trust government to not, you know, be mired in this political process as we see in both the UK and the US and actually do something?
Right, so this is a challenge, but you know, in the end, the challenge is best addressed, I think, by a concept of public interest regulation, and whether you do that for one for each individual company, you might, because there are different issues that arise, for example, in relation to Facebook or Amazon, Google, there are quite different questions that arise. But this is the world we're living in. But you know, there's a bigger question, which is then what happens, you know, for example, if you take driverless cars, and so the next generation of cars are likely to be electric and in time driverless. So this is going to change employment, it's going to change transport, it's probably going to change insurance. It's got a massive series of implications. My point is, this technological revolution is basically benign because, let's be clear, if you can move to driverless cars, you'll probably reduce the number of accidents, you'll probably reduce the cost of it, but it's got huge consequences. So the role of government is to make sure that the technology is enabled in a sensible way and the risks of it and the consequences that could be damaging are taken account of.
So let's talk about something that's not benign. Cybersecurity experts are saying that Russian internet trolls are evolving their strategy. They're not creating their own propaganda to interfere in the US 2020 elections. They're creating fake accounts that promote divisive propaganda to essentially mask their identities. I mean, does that concern you?
Yeah, of course. And what we've got to do is we've got to get a real handle on it, expose it and sort it out. Now, I'm not, at this point in time, I think there's a big question for Western policymakers, which is, what's your sanction? Mm-hmm. You know, at a certain point, are you going to retaliate? Is it possible to get some form of agreement where countries come together and agree that these things can't happen? I think these are really difficult questions, and I'm not actually sure what the answer at the moment is, but I think for sure it's going to become a major question, because you're going to get. And by the way, what Russia is doing could easily be followed by other countries. And it's a completely new form of warfare, and a very serious one.
How concerned are you about the rise of China in technology?
Very, but on the other hand, if I was Chinese, I'd say, why shouldn't we be great in technology? We're going to be one of the most powerful countries in the world, and you know, our economy is going to be one of the largest, not the largest. We're going to be a big political power, so why shouldn't we also be a big tech power? And I would say, okay, I completely understand that, but I think the competition coming out of China, because it is a different political system to ours, means it's all the more important that we as policymakers respond to this tech revolution in the right way, not the wrong way.
Is the rise of the Chinese tech industry, in your view, an existential threat to Western liberal democracies?
I mean, that's a very big statement to make. I think it poses challenges for it. Let me put it in that way for the moment. And certainly part of the policy debate that we've got to have is that how do we manage to maintain a technological edge?
So you're in Silicon Valley, you're meeting with companies. Who are you interested in working with, and what do you want to accomplish?
Well, I'm interested in working with the companies large and small. And what we're doing is creating within my institute a center for tech and public policy. And the idea is to put change makers and policymakers together in circumstances where, you know, we can bring a mutual understanding, and out of that should come what I call realizable and sensible policy.
My exclusive interview there with former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair. Coming up, SpaceX's satellite rival, how OneWeb plans to win the race to create a space internet and beat out Elon Musk. This is Bloomberg. Satellite maker OneWeb recently took the first steps toward its goal of building a space internet. In other words, using thousands of satellites to help provide Wi-Fi access to everyone on the planet. Ashley Vance reports on OneWeb in the latest edition of Bloomberg Business Week. He joins us now from Palo Alto. And Ashley, you report on OneWeb's very first launch from the heart of the Amazon. How did that go?
It was pretty interesting. Yeah, you know, I was in French Guiana, which is up at the tip of South America, and I've been covering OneWeb for several years now, waiting for them to get to this point. And so finally, you know, they've launched the first 6 of what's meant to be 1,980 satellites.
So what exactly does OneWeb hope to accomplish, and how are they taking on Elon Musk?
So both companies, SpaceX and OneWeb, are in this game to do what you could call a space internet. And basically today, there's still about 3 billion people that can't be reached by fiber optic cables. And so they want the same internet that the rest of us enjoy. And so these companies are racing to provide this. OneWeb started out very much preaching this do-gooder type mission of bringing the internet to people that don't have it. They tend to be in pretty poor and remote locations. As time has gone on, OneWeb's found out that the service is very expensive to build, and so some of the first customers they're talking about going after now are actually, you know, delivering high-speed internet to planes, to cars, to boats, and people that can afford to pay for this service when they're in a remote location. But essentially, SpaceX and OneWeb are racing after the same thing, and there's a couple other companies that are doing this as well.
So who's going to get there first?
Well, SpaceX set up a couple satellites last year. They were test satellites for its system that it calls Starlink. It's unclear right now how well those are working or where SpaceX is as far as mass producing its satellites. So in some sense, OneWeb has the lead now. It's put up 6 satellites. They seem to be working. There's also a lot of other stuff that goes into this. You have to have these cheap antennas to receive the signal back on Earth. You have to have spectrum available to let you run this service globally. And it looks like OneWeb is ahead of just about everyone when you take all these pieces together. But SpaceX and Elon, as usual, keep talking a big game and say, you know, they're coming as well this year with hundreds of satellites.
There's some personal tension between the founder of OneWeb and Musk. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the founder of OneWeb is this guy named Greg Weiler. He's a pretty interesting character that I've profiled over the years. And at one point, he was basically working inside of Google. And when he first started thinking of this space internet idea, it looked like he might build it in conjunction with Google, and then at some point he became friends with Elon, and they were talking about the space internet, and it looked like all 3 of these groups might get together, Greg, Elon, and Google. And as time went on, Greg basically woke up one day and found out that SpaceX was determined to build its own space internet. SpaceX brought Google on as a founder, and OneWeb had to run out and get people like Richard Branson's Virgin Group and SoftBank and Qualcomm to fund its project. And so, especially for Greg Weiler, you know, this is on a personal level, I think this is some serious competition, and he would like to get there before Elon.
Meantime, the amount of stuff being sent into space is rapidly increasing. You write that current satellite orders would increase the amount of hardware orbiting Earth by 5 times just over the next few years. What is all this other stuff doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're at this really interesting point with space and rockets and satellites that most people aren't aware of, which is that the price of rockets has come down dramatically. There's a ton of small rocket companies that are just starting to launch, like Rocket Lab now, that are bringing the price even further down. The price of satellites has come way down from $1 billion to $100,000 for these small shoebox-sized satellites. And so currently orbiting the Earth, I think there's about 1,500 satellites. And if you look at the launch manifest for the rocket companies and these satellite companies like OneWeb and SpaceX, that 1,500 number over the next 5 years could go as high as some people have it at 20, 30,000, 40,000 satellites surrounding the Earth. And I sort of think of it as them building a type of computing shell that's going to surround the Earth. It's going to be doing stuff like communications with the space internet. It's going to be taking pictures of the Earth every day. Already, this company, Planet Labs, takes a picture of every spot on Earth every single day. There's all kinds of new science that's going to be taking place. And, you know, I just don't think most people are aware that the skies are about to be filled with many, many, many times more satellites than we've ever seen before.
Meantime, since you wrote the bio on Elon Musk, I got to ask you about the latest kerfuffle with the SEC. The SEC asking Musk to be held in contempt. Him responding, saying, you know, he's got a constitutional right to free speech. You know, in the meantime, this abrupt about-face on store closings. He announced they were going to close all the stores. Then a week later, that, you know, half the stores would remain open. What's your take on Musk in 2019? Big question.
It's an interesting time for sure. I was enjoying the free speech argument. You know, there's a part of Elon that's just so perplexing, which is kind of why he's on Twitter doing this stuff at all. It seems to just create more problems from him. I think historically he used Twitter really well as this marketing tool. Tesla doesn't buy any ads, and Elon had all the goodwill of people on Twitter, and you know, really seemed to get Tesla an outsized share of attention. Over the last year to 18 months, it's shifted to where you still have some of that, and then you have Elon just going off into some pretty weird places and appearing to be, I think it's perplexing to a lot of people, but this stuff fighting the SEC and everything, that's classic Elon. I mean, he's defiant to the end and is going to stick by what he thinks is the right thing to do. But I just have to think at some point this is causing more harm than good overall for him.
Right. Yeah, you got to wonder. Well, we are covering every twist and turn, as you can imagine. Ashley Vance, as always, thanks so much for joining us. You can check out Ashley's latest story in Bloomberg Business Week on newsstands and online now. You can also hear from the magazine's top reporters and editors every weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio and at Bloomberg.com. Still ahead, a sweeping criminal conspiracy of wealthy parents making bribes for college admissions is rocking many industries, from finance to entertainment and even tech. Details ahead. This is Bloomberg. Foxconn chair and billionaire Terry Gou responded with outrage to a Microsoft lawsuit Tuesday. Microsoft is claiming Foxconn owes royalties on consumer devices. Gou responded, accusing the software giant of a personal attack against him and his company.
I'll say this now to Microsoft. You're afraid. If you had the guts, go and sue them. Why push on a Taiwanese contract manufacturer making such thin margins? Why go after us? Their goal is to get public attention. Why now, in the middle of an 8-year negotiation? Because the US and China are about to sign a trade deal.
Microsoft, meantime, is claiming that it is trying to merely enforce contractual commitments from a 2013 agreement with Foxconn. Parents, university coaches, and college admissions counselors were among dozens charged Tuesday in a sweeping criminal conspiracy that helped applicants win admission to elite universities. Among those charged, William McGlashan, who heads TPG's business promoting social good and has been a guest multiple times on this show. McGlashan allegedly agreed to pay $50,000 to a charity with the understanding that his son's answers on the ACT exam would be corrected, according to court documents. Robert Sangrio, founder of the venture capital firm Dragon Global Management, which has invested in Facebook and Uber, was also accused of conspiring to bribe university officials to help his daughter gain admission to the University of Southern California. And finally, it was 30 years ago that a British computer scientist named Tim Berners-Lee turned in his proposal for what would become the World Wide Web. It came into the public consciousness with simple graphical web pages, chat rooms, and AOL disks, plenty of AOL disks. And with the World Wide Web, the world was transformed. Smartphone technology, social media, instant gratification. But with all that, of course, came problems. Tech addiction, fake news, division, discord, and much more, causing its creator to say this.
Whoops, the web is not the web we wanted in every respect.
But he's also got a plan to fix it all.
The Web Foundation is collaboratively building a contract for the web, bringing governments, companies, and citizens together to commit to building a better web. We need your help to make this work.
Let's hope this fix-it-all plan doesn't take another 30 years. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. On Wednesday's show, we're going to be sitting down with Roger McNamee, Elevation Partners founder and author of Zucked. And we are, of course, live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology. Follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.